Today we have a story that will show you why you should never underestimate an old man. My daughter thought I didn't see her slip a powder into my soup. But after 30 years in the Army, you learn to notice everything. As soon as she turned her back, I swapped our bowls. Her betrayal was about to become her own trap. We would love to know from what corners of the world you're watching. Please let us know your city in the comments below. I want to give a special shout out to my wonderful and active subscribers, Jennifer from the Bronx, Olivia, and Christopher from New York. Thank you all so much for your incredible support. Thank you for being with me. And now, make yourselves comfortable. My name is Charles, and I am 72 years old. My life since my dear Eleanor passed 10 years ago has been a study in quiet, disciplined order. The habits of a 30-year career in the United States Army do not simply fade away with retirement. They embed themselves in your very bones. I still wake at 0500 hours, long before the Atlanta sun has begun to bleach the dark from the sky. I make my bed with perfect, exacting hospital corners. I shave, I dress, and I move through the silent, sleeping rooms of my house with a sense of purpose that feels more and more like a memory of a purpose I once had. This house, a large, comfortable home in a neighborhood of old, established trees, was once a bustling command center of family life. It was filled with the sounds of our son Michael's childhood, the scent of Eleanor's baking, the constant cheerful chaos of a life being fully lived. Now, it is a museum of that life. The silence is a physical presence, a heavy, dust-filled quiet that seems to absorb all sound. My only companion is the ghost of my wife. I speak to her photograph on the mantelpiece every morning. "Morning, Ellie," I say to her smiling 20-year-old face. "Looks like another quiet one today." The quiet is both a comfort and a curse. It is predictable. It is safe. But it is also a profound and unending loneliness, a void that the rigid structure of my military routine can keep at bay, but never truly fill. It was this loneliness, this gaping vulnerability in the otherwise fortified walls of my life that allowed the enemy to walk right through the front door. She arrived a month ago on a Tuesday. The ring of the doorbell was so unexpected, so alien in the quiet of the afternoon, that for a moment I thought I had imagined it. I opened the door, and there she was, my daughter, Deborah. I hadn't seen her in nearly 3 years, not since the disastrous Christmas dinner where she'd introduced her then boyfriend, a man with shifty eyes and a weak handshake, who, I later learned, had a warrant out for his arrest in 2 states. Our estrangement hadn't been a single dramatic event. It was a slow, painful erosion, a decade of her bad choices and my gruff, military-style disapproval. She was a drifter, moving from city to city, from one dead-end job to another, from one questionable man to the next. Our phone calls had become a predictable, painful script. Her breezy, vague descriptions of a life that was clearly unraveling, followed by the inevitable, thinly veiled request for money. I loved my daughter, but I did not respect the woman she had become, and she, in turn, resented the judgment she heard in my silence. Now, she stood on my porch, looking tired and worn, a cheap suitcase at her feet. She was thinner than I remembered, and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. This was not the defiant, rebellious teenager I remembered, but a woman in her 40s who had been battered and bruised by life. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice small, a calculated performance of childlike vulnerability. "Deborah," I replied, my voice a gruff, neutral thing, giving nothing away. What are you doing here? The story came tumbling out, a well-rehearsed tale of woe. She had finally left the latest bad boyfriend. She had lost her job as a waitress. She had nowhere else to go. She was ready to turn over a new leaf, she said, to get her life back on track, to reconnect with the family she had so foolishly pushed away. All she needed was a place to stay, just for a little while, to get back on her feet. Every instinct I had, every ounce of training that had been drilled into me over 30 years of assessing threats, screamed at me that this was a lie. I saw the inconsistencies in her story, the way her eyes darted away when I asked a direct question, the tremor in her hand that was not from sorrow, but from something else, something harder. The soldier in me, the man trained to spot an ambush, saw red flags everywhere. He saw a strategic insertion into a vulnerable position with the intent to exploit a weakness. But the father in me, the lonely old man who spoke to a photograph every morning, saw something else. He saw a chance, a final, desperate opportunity to fix what was broken, to be the father his daughter needed, to have the sound of family in his quiet, empty house once more. He saw a path out of the gray, silent landscape of his own loneliness. And so, against every dictate of my training and my intuition, I made a conscious, deliberate choice. I chose to believe the father and to ignore the soldier. It was a fatal, sentimental mistake, a dereliction of duty to myself that would have earned a court-martial in my old life. "All right, Deborah," I said, stepping back from the door. "You can stay for a little while." As she stepped over the threshold, dragging her suitcase and her lifetime of chaos into the quiet, ordered world I had so carefully constructed, I felt a flicker of foolish, fatherly hope. But beneath it, a cold, hard knot of dread settled in my gut. I, a man trained to spot an enemy from a mile away, had just willingly opened my gates and invited the Trojan horse into the heart of my fortress. The first few weeks of Deborah's stay were a master class in calculated deception. She played the part of the prodigal daughter with a convincing, if slightly over-rehearsed, sincerity. She would fuss over me, insisting I take my vitamins, fluffing the pillows on my armchair, and cooking simple, bland meals with a great show of effort. She spoke of her past with a curated air of regret, of the bad choices and the wrong men, all while painting a picture of a woman who had finally seen the error of her ways and had come home to heal. I listened and I watched, and the old soldier in me remained on high alert. My training teaches you to look for patterns, for the inconsistencies between words and actions. Deborah's words spoke of reconnection and family, but her eyes were constantly scanning the room, assessing the value of my possessions. Her questions were never about my feelings or my health, but about the practicalities of my existence. "Dad, is your army pension direct deposited?" she'd ask, her voice casual as she washed the dishes. "Do you have a financial advisor, or do you manage your own portfolio?" She was a reconnaissance scout, mapping the terrain of my life for a future invasion. I would also hear her on the phone at night, her voice a low, urgent whisper in her bedroom. I only ever heard one name, a name that was always spoken with a mixture of frustration and deference. Marcus. The opening salvo of her campaign began on a Monday morning. I woke with a sudden, searing pain in my gut, a vicious cramp that felt like a hot knife being twisted inside me. It left me breathless and doubled over, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. It was a type of pain I had never experienced, alien and alarming. It subsided after an hour, leaving me feeling as weak and fragile as a newborn kitten. Deborah's reaction was a storm of perfectly calibrated concern. She hovered over me, her face a mask of daughterly panic, insisting she call an ambulance. I refused. She then insisted on taking me to the doctor, who, after a brief examination, could find nothing obviously wrong and sent me home with a diagnosis of a probable stomach bug and advice to rest. This, I now see, was the perfect opening for her. She had a legitimate, doctor-confirmed reason to treat me as an invalid. "Dad, you're not taking care of yourself," she'd said, her voice thick with a feigned sorrowful concern. "You need proper nutrition. I'm going to make you Mom's special chicken soup, the one she always made when you were feeling under the weather. It will build up your strength." The invocation of Eleanor's memory, of her legendary, almost magical soup, was a brilliant and deeply cynical move. It was a psychological weapon designed to bypass my defenses by appealing to my deepest grief and nostalgia. And so, the next evening, I found myself sitting at my own kitchen table, feeling tired and strangely vulnerable, and I watched my daughter perform a loving imitation of my late wife. She moved around the kitchen with a confidence that surprised me, chopping the celery, carrots, and onions with a steady hand. The familiar, comforting scent of the broth began to fill the house, a ghost of 1,000 happy family meals. I watched her, and the old soldier in me, the man who had spent a lifetime observing his surroundings for any sign of a threat, was on full alert. My hearing, honed by years of needing to distinguish the snap of a twig from the rustle of the wind, was sharp. My eyes, trained to spot the slightest, most insignificant detail that was out of place, missed nothing. She had her back to me, standing over the stove. The television was on in the corner, a local news broadcast, and she thought my attention was fixed on it. It was then that I saw it. It was a movement so small, so quick, it would have been invisible to a casual observer. Her right hand, which had been resting on the counter, dipped into the deep pocket of her apron. When it emerged, her fingers were pinched together, holding a small, clear glass vial. With a furtive, practiced glance over her shoulder to confirm I was still looking at the TV, she deftly uncapped the vial with one hand. In a single, fluid motion, she tipped its contents, a fine white, crystalline powder, into one of the 2 bowls of soup she had just ladled out. She gave that specific bowl a quick, almost invisible stir with the tip of a spoon, then recapped the vial and slipped it back into her pocket. The entire act had taken less than 3 seconds. A profound, absolute, and chillingly calm certainty settled over me. There was no shock, no surge of rage. My military training, the thousands of hours of drills designed to override emotional responses in moments of crisis, took over completely. I did not gasp. I did not move a muscle. I simply registered the information. An unknown agent has been introduced into a food source. The objective is incapacitation. The perpetrator is my own daughter. I needed to create a diversion. I needed to get her out of the room. I let out a small, weak cough. "Deborah, honey," I said, my voice deliberately frail. "Before we eat, could you do your old dad a favor? I was just thinking about that first trip we all took to the lake. The photo album is in the living room, on the bottom bookshelf, the green one. I would so love to see it." Her face broke into a wide, brilliant smile, a smile of pure, predatory triumph. She thought her sentimental old father was softening, lost in a haze of memory and weakness. Of course, Daddy, she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that was almost nauseating. I'll get it right now. The moment she turned the corner and disappeared into the living room, I moved. My body, despite 72 years, responded with the swift, silent, and economical efficiency of a soldier. 3 quick, silent steps. I reached the counter. My hands did not tremble. I picked up the bowl on the left and the bowl on the right, and in a single fluid motion, I swapped their positions. I was back in my chair, my hands resting on the table, my expression one of weary patience before she had even reached the bookshelf. The trap was no longer for me. It was now set for her. Deborah returned to the kitchen, the green photo album held in her hands, a prop in her sick little play. Her smile was one of pure saccharine sweetness, the look of a predator who is confident its prey is thoroughly ensnared. Here it is, Daddy, she said, her voice a soft, gentle coo. She placed the heavy album on the table, and then, with a great show of daughterly care, she set the 2 bowls of soup down. She placed the one on the right, the one containing the fine white powder, directly in front of me. The other, the clean one, she placed for herself. The casual domestic nature of the act, the simple serving of a meal, was the most chilling part of all. This was not a crime of passion. It was a premeditated act of cold, calculated betrayal. There you go, she said, sitting down opposite me. You eat up now. Get your strength back. Mom's recipe is the best medicine. I did not look at the soup. I looked at the photo album. I opened its worn, leatherette cover and was confronted with the ghost of a happy family. There was Eleanor, young and vibrant, holding a baby-faced Deborah on her hip. There was a much younger me in my army dress uniform, smiling with a pride and hope that felt like it belonged to another man. I let my fingers trace the faded, glossy images. The grief I felt in that moment was real and profound, but it was not just for my dead wife. It was for my daughter, for the innocent child in these photographs who had somehow grown into the monster sitting across from me. A single genuine tear welled in my eye and slid down my cheek. Oh, Daddy, don't be sad, Deborah said, her voice thick with a false sympathy that turned my stomach. She mistook my tear of grief for a sign of my weakness, of my sentimental decline. It was the perfect cover. It's just a lot of memories, I said, my voice a convincing, gravelly whisper. I picked up my spoon. Her eyes, I noted, were fixed on me, a hawk watching its prey. She was waiting. I dipped the spoon into the warm, fragrant broth, the broth that was perfectly safe, and brought it to my lips. It was delicious. Eleanor had been a wonderful cook, and to her credit, Deborah had replicated the recipe perfectly. How is it? She asked, a little too eagerly. Just like your mother's, I said, and the words were a double-edged sword. I took another spoonful, and another. I ate with the slow, deliberate pace of a man savoring a meal, all the while feeling her intense, expectant gaze upon me. She, in turn, ate her own soup, the poison soup, with a distracted, almost hurried air, her focus not on her own meal, but on mine. She was waiting for the show to begin. She was waiting for the cramps, for the sweat to break out on my brow, for me to clutch my chest and fall to the floor. But nothing happened. I finished my soup. I complimented her on it again. I slowly, methodically, flipped through the pages of the photo album, pointing out pictures, sharing half-forgotten memories, drawing out the time. With every passing minute that I remained upright and healthy, I could see a subtle, creeping confusion begin to cloud her triumphant expression. Her smile became a little more strained, her movements a little more agitated. "You look tired, Dad," she said finally, after a half hour of this quiet, psychological torture. "You should probably get to bed. Rest is the best thing for you." "I think you're right, honey," I said, allowing a weary sigh to escape my lips. I stood up slowly, a bit unsteadily, playing the part of the frail invalid to perfection. "Thank you for the lovely soup. It was just what I needed." I went to my bedroom, but I did not go to sleep. I turned off the lights, closed the door, and sat in an armchair in the darkest corner of the room, the position that gave me a clear line of sight to the sliver of light under the door. I waited. This was a familiar feeling. The quiet, patient vigilance of a soldier on watch in the dead of night. An hour later, I heard her. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. She was restless. Then I heard the sound of her voice, a low, urgent whisper from her bedroom. She was on the phone. I crept to my door, my movements as silent as a cat, and pressed my ear against the cool wood. "I don't know what happened, Marcus," she was whispering, her voice tight with frustration. "He ate the whole bowl. Nothing. He just went to bed. Maybe the dosage was wrong. Maybe it takes longer to work on older people. No, I can't give him more. He's getting suspicious. I can feel it. We'll have to wait until morning. We'll just have to see what happens in the morning." I backed away from the door. My final suspicions confirmed. There was a partner, Marcus, and they were impatient. I returned to my chair and continued on my vigil. Sometime in the deep, quiet hours, I heard a low groan from her room, followed by the sound of her rushing to the bathroom. The trap had sprung. I waited until my alarm went off at 0500 hours. I rose, showered, shaved, and dressed with my usual methodical precision. I walked into the kitchen, the first rays of the morning sun just beginning to stream through the windows. The house was quiet, too quiet, and then I saw her. She was curled on the cold linoleum floor by the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and beaded with sweat. She was clutching her stomach, her body racked with the very cramps and agony she had intended for me. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain, confusion, and a dawning, terrible fear. I did not rush to her side. I did not call for an ambulance. I walked to the coffee maker, scooped my usual amount of coffee into the filter, and started the pot brewing. I stood there, my back to her, and listened to her pathetic, shallow groans. When the coffee was ready, I poured myself a mug. Only then did I turn and walk over to where she lay, a broken, suffering mess on my kitchen floor. I stood over her, a judge looking down upon a guilty and condemned prisoner. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot black coffee. "Interesting," I said, my voice as calm and as cold as a winter morning. "It seems you've come down with a rather nasty stomach bug. Tell me, Deborah, just what did you put in my soup last night?" The terror that bloomed in my daughter's eyes was a horrific and deeply satisfying thing to witness. It was the terror of a conspirator whose perfect, foolproof plan has just been revealed as a catastrophic failure. It was the look of a predator who has just realized it has stepped into a trap far more clever than its own. All the manufactured sweetness, the performative concern, it all dissolved in an instant, leaving behind only the raw, ugly fear of a child who had been caught. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice a weak, pathetic rasp. She tried to push herself up, to regain some semblance of control, but a fresh wave of cramps sent her slumping back against the kitchen cabinets. It must have been the chicken. Maybe it was bad. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting her pathetic denial hang in the stale air of the kitchen. I would not allow this to devolve into an argument. I would deal in facts, in the cold, hard currency of the truth. "Don't lie to me, Deborah," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable edge of a command that had been honed by 30 years of military service. "There's no point. I saw you." I was watching the reflection in the glass of the china cabinet. I saw the vial. I saw you pour the powder into the bowl you intended for me. I let that sink in. The only reason you are the one writhing in pain on my floor, and I am the one standing here drinking my coffee, is because I swapped our bowls while you were in the living room looking for that photo album. The finality of my statement, the undeniable proof that I had not only seen her act, but had outmaneuvered her, broke her completely. The denials died in her throat, replaced by a torrent of raw, ugly, and utterly self-serving sobs. The confession, when it came, was a jumbled, pathetic mess of blame-shifting and self-pity. "It wasn't my idea," she wailed, tears and sweat mingling on her pale face. "It was Marcus. It was all his idea, Daddy. I swear. He's the one who got the powder." "Marcus," I repeated, the name a cold, hard stone in my mouth. "The boyfriend you're always whispering to on the phone. We're in debt," she cried, the story tumbling out now, a river of desperation. "Bad debt. Marcus, he made some bad investments. We owe people money, dangerous people. He said this was the only way. He said you had everything. The house, the pension, the savings. He said you were old and alone and that it was our duty to manage it for you." The euphemism, the idea of framing their theft as a form of responsible management, was so disgustingly audacious, it almost made me laugh. "And the powder, Deborah?" I asked, my voice like ice. "What was the plan for the powder?" "It wasn't supposed to kill you," she shrieked, as if that were a noble distinction. "He swore it wasn't lethal. It's a heart medication, a beta blocker. Marcus said that in a man your age, a large, unexpected dose would likely induce a cardiac event, a heart attack, maybe a stroke, something that would look natural. Then you'd be incapacitated, and I, as your only daughter, would get medical power of attorney. We could access the accounts, sell the house, pay off the debts. We just needed you out of the way, just for a little while, to hear your own child, your own flesh and blood, calmly articulate a plan to induce a stroke in you for financial gain is a unique and soul-crushing experience. The last lingering embers of fatherly affection I held for her were extinguished in that moment, leaving behind only the cold gray ash of my own foolish hope. I looked down at her, at this pathetic, greedy stranger who wore my daughter's face. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt nothing at all but a profound and absolute sense of finality. I walked over to the kitchen clock and looked at the time. "You have 10 minutes, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Pack a bag with whatever you can carry. Then you will walk out that front door and you will never, ever set foot in this house again. As of this moment, you are no longer my daughter." She stared at me in disbelief. "Daddy, please," she begged, another wave of cramps causing her to curl into a ball. "I'm sorry. I'm sick. You can't just throw me out like this. The sickness you are feeling now is the one you intended for me," I replied, my voice unyielding. It will pass in a day or two. But the sickness in your heart, the moral rot that allowed you to even consider this, I don't think that will ever pass. You have 9 minutes. I turned my back on her and walked into my study. I did not watch as she struggled to her feet, sobbing and pleading, and stumbled down the hall to her room. The moment I heard the front door click shut behind her, I sprang into action. The grieving father was gone. The soldier, the strategist, was now in complete command. My first call was to my lawyer. "Jonathan," I said, my voice crisp and clear. "It's Charles. The situation we've discussed, the hypothetical one, it has occurred. I need you to come to the house as soon as possible. It is time to change the will." My second call was to a home security company that worked with many of my fellow veterans. I explained that there had been a credible threat against my person and my property. I ordered new, high-security locks for all the doors and windows. I ordered a state-of-the-art camera surveillance system for the entire perimeter of the property. And then I ordered the final piece of my new defense, a small, silent panic button to be installed under the lip of my desk in the study with a direct, one-touch connection to the local police department. I knew this was not over. Their plan had failed, which would only make them more desperate. They had tried to take me down with stealth and subterfuge. I knew that their next attack would likely be a frontal assault, and I would be ready for it. I was no longer a lonely, grieving father in a quiet, empty house. I was a commander, and I was fortifying my base against a known and imminent enemy. In the days that followed my daughter's banishment, my house was transformed from a quiet museum into a fortified command post. The security company, a discreet and efficient outfit run by a former Marine, descended on the property. They installed new, high-tensile steel deadbolts. They placed small, almost invisible cameras in the eaves of the roof, covering every angle of approach. And they installed the panic button, a small, silent red disc beneath the lip of my study desk, a direct and untraceable line to the local police dispatch. The quiet hum of the new surveillance system was a constant reminder that my home was no longer a sanctuary from the world, but a fortress against my own blood. As the technician was drilling the hole for the new deadbolt on the front door, the loud, invasive sound echoing through the house, my gaze fell upon a photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of a much younger Deborah, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July picnic. Her smile was wide and gap-toothed, her eyes full of a pure, uncomplicated adoration. The question that had haunted me for years returned with a fresh, searing intensity. How did that little girl, the one who had believed her father was the strongest man in the world, become the woman who was willing to induce a stroke in him for money? As the drill bit whined, my mind drifted back through the years, back through the long, painful decade of our estrangement, searching for the precise moment the fracture had begun, the point where my sweet little girl had started her long, slow march to becoming a stranger. It all started, I believe, in the raw, desolate aftermath of Eleanor's death. Grief is a strange and solitary country, and we each navigated its terrain in our own way. I, a man conditioned by a lifetime of military discipline, processed my sorrow through order, through the rigid maintenance of routine. I found solace in the familiar rhythms of my old life, in the crisp folding of a flag, in the polishing of my shoes. My grief was a private, stoic, and silent thing. Deborah's grief was different. It was loud, chaotic, and desperate. She had always been closer to her mother, and Eleanor's passing had unmoored her, leaving her adrift in a sea of emotion she did not know how to navigate. It was a time when we could have and should have grown closer, two grieving souls clinging to each other for support. But I did not know how to speak the language of her sorrow, and she, in turn, saw my stoicism not as a coping mechanism, but as a cold, unfeeling detachment. The first cracks in our relationship formed in that shared, unbridgeable silence. The cracks widened with the arrival of the first Marcus. There were several men over the years, but they all seemed to be variations on a theme, cut from the same cheap, synthetic cloth. This first one was a smooth-talking real estate investor with expensive shoes and the dead, empty eyes of a shark. Deborah, so lost and vulnerable, was completely enthralled by him. She brought him to the house for dinner, and I watched him all evening. My internal threat assessment system, honed by 30 years of judging character in high-stakes situations, screaming red alerts. He was a con man, and my daughter was his mark. A week later, the inevitable request came. Deborah cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes shining with a desperate manufactured excitement. Marcus had a can't-miss opportunity, a surefire investment in a new condo development. All they needed was a small short-term loan of $20,000 to secure their spot. I looked at my daughter, at the hopeful, pleading look on her face, and my heart broke for her. But I would not allow her to be a fool. My response was blunt, direct, and utterly devoid of the diplomatic softness the situation required. No, I said, absolutely not. The man is a grifter, Deborah. He's playing you. I want you to stay away from him. I had intended it as an act of fatherly protection, but she did not see it that way. She saw it as an act of control, a dismissal of her judgment, an insult to the man she thought she loved. You just don't want me to be happy, she'd screamed, her face a mask of furious, wounded pride. You've never thought I was smart enough to make my own decisions. You can't control me, Dad. She had stormed out of the house that day, and that argument became the blueprint for our relationship for the next 10 years. It was a repeating, toxic cycle. She would make a poor choice. I would disapprove with my gruff, military bluntness, and she would interpret my concern as a controlling judgment, pushing her further away. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits stopped altogether, until finally there was nothing left but a painful 3-year silence. A silence that was only broken when she appeared on my doorstep a month ago. A predator disguised as a prodigal daughter, ready to execute her final, desperate, and monstrous plan. The week following my daughter's expulsion was one of grim, methodical preparation. The soldier in me, the part of my mind that had been dormant for years, was now fully awake and in command. I operated not with the panicked energy of a victim, but with the cold, clear-eyed focus of a commander securing his territory against an inevitable counterattack. The enemy was my own daughter and her desperate, manipulative boyfriend, Marcus. I knew their first attempt had failed due to their own incompetence and my strategic advantage. I also knew that their failure would not lead to retreat, but to a more desperate and likely more violent form of attack. A cornered animal is the most dangerous, and I was determined to be ready for it. The security system was installed with military precision. The new locks were formidable, the cameras discreetly covering every angle of the property, feeding a live signal to a monitor I had set up in my study. The panic button, a small red disc, was now affixed to the underside of my desk, my thumb resting on it as I read in the evenings, a silent and potent reassurance. I had a final, somber meeting with my lawyer, Mr. Davies. We signed the new will. It was a simple, brutal document. It left my entire estate, the house, my savings, my substantial Army pension, to a single beneficiary, a charitable trust I had him create for the benefit of homeless military veterans in the Atlanta area. My daughter, Deborah, was mentioned by name, but only to be explicitly and irrevocably disinherited. The process was a quiet, painful act, like signing a death certificate for a relationship that had already expired. I spent my evenings in a state of watchful waiting. I would sit in my study, the house dark, except for the small pool of light from my reading lamp, and I would listen. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside the window was a potential threat to be assessed and categorized. I felt no fear. The 30 years I had spent in the Army had burned that emotion out of me, replacing it with a kind of hypervigilant, operational calm. I was a soldier in my own home, standing watch in the last lonely perimeter of my life. The attack, when it came, was exactly 1 week after I had kicked her out. It was just after 10 at night. I was in my study, reading a book on the history of the Civil War, when I heard it. Not a knock, not the ring of the doorbell, but the violent, splintering crash of my own front door being kicked in. The sound was a brutal violation of the home's peace, an act of open warfare. I did not startle. I did not reach for the phone. My hand, which had been resting on my desk, simply moved a few inches to the right and pressed down firmly on the silent red button. A tiny, imperceptible LED light on the receiver glowed green. The call had been made. Help was on its way. My training had taught me that, in an ambush, the first 3 seconds determined survival. My first 3 seconds had been spent summoning the cavalry. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, heavy and angry. They appeared in the doorway of my study, not as a daughter and her guest, but as common home invaders. Marcus was in the lead, his face a mask of arrogant, brutish determination. He held a sheaf of legal-looking documents in his hand, and behind him was Deborah, my daughter, her face a pale, frightened, but resolute shadow. She had made her choice. She had chosen the side of the jackals. "All right, old man," Marcus sneered, his voice filling the quiet room. He swaggered to my desk and threw the papers down in front of me. "The games are over. You're going to sign these. It's a power of attorney and a quit-claim deed to the house. You sign them now. We walk out of here, and you can live out the rest of your pathetic little life on your Army pension. You refuse, and I'm going to make you regret it." He leaned in close, his breath sour, with a cheap, desperate confidence. "You're an old man," he said, his voice a low, threatening growl. "You've got no one. No one is coming to help you." His tactical assessment of the situation was, of course, completely and fatally wrong. I did not look at him. I did not acknowledge his presence. My gaze was fixed on my daughter. I looked at her, at the stranger who wore her face, the face I had once loved more than life itself, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty landscape of pity. "Is this it, Deborah?" I asked, my voice quiet, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Is this the woman you've become, a common thief, a home invader, kicking down the door of the very house your mother brought you home to from the hospital? Is this what she would have wanted for you? Shut up, old man, Marcus roared, enraged by my calm, by my refusal to be intimidated. Don't you talk to her? You are going to sign these papers right now, or I swear to God, I am going to make you. He balled his hand into a fist and took a single, menacing step around the desk towards me. It was the move I had been waiting for. The physical threat. I kept my eyes locked on my daughter's, a final, silent plea for her to see the abyss she was standing on the edge of. You're wrong, son, I said, my voice still as calm as a frozen lake. I'm not alone. I have friends, very fast friends, in fact. And if you listen closely, I added, a small, sad smile touching my lips for the first time. You can probably hear them now. And in the tense, humming silence of the study, we all heard it, a faint, distant sound at first, a barely perceptible wail, but it was growing louder, closer, splitting the quiet suburban night in two. It was an unmistakable, rising and falling, and beautiful sound of approaching police sirens. The first faint wail of the sirens was a beautiful and terrible sound. To me, it was the sound of the cavalry arriving, the welcome thunder of imminent rescue. To my daughter and her brutish boyfriend, it was the sound of a steel trap snapping shut. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and absolute. Marcus's arrogant, sneering confidence evaporated in a flash, replaced by the wide-eyed, frantic terror of a cornered rat. He spun around, his eyes darting towards the windows, the hallway, searching for an escape route that did not exist. His tough guy facade, so convincing just moments before, was revealed to be a thin, brittle shell, and it had just been shattered. Deborah's reaction was different, and in a way, more tragic. She did not look for an escape. She simply froze, her body rigid, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. In her eyes, I saw the full, catastrophic realization of her life's choices finally crashing down upon her. She had followed this man, this petty, violent grifter, down a dark and winding path, and it had led her here, to this moment, a common criminal standing in the wreckage of her own father's home, with the promise of sirens growing ever closer. The life of easy money and no consequences she had been chasing for 20 years had just been revealed as a foolish, childish fantasy. The 90 seconds it took for the police to arrive felt like an eternity. The wail of the sirens grew from a distant cry to an overwhelming street-shaking roar. Red and blue lights began to flash through the study windows, painting the walls in frantic, strobing colors, turning our quiet, suburban drama into a scene from a television crime show. I heard the screech of tires on the pavement outside, the slamming of car doors, and then the authoritative, booming sound of a voice shouting, "Police, show me your hands." 2 officers, weapons drawn, appeared in the doorway of my study, their movements swift, professional, and utterly uncompromising. The sight of them, of the real, undeniable authority they represented, seemed to suck all the remaining fight out of Marcus. His hands shot into the air in a gesture of immediate, cowardly surrender. Deborah just stood there, weeping, her body shaking with a profound, helpless terror. The arrest itself was a grim, efficient, and deeply surreal procedure. The officers separated them, pushing Marcus against the wall and cuffing him with a practiced, impersonal roughness. He, in turn, began to babble, his voice a pathetic, whiny stream of denials and lies. "It's a misunderstanding, officers. This is a family matter." He invited us here. He's an old, confused man. I watched my daughter. The second officer approached her more gently. Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back, he said, his voice not unkind. As the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, a sound of such terrible finality, a single, heartbreaking sob escaped her lips. And in that moment, the soldier in me, the calm, strategic commander, was momentarily eclipsed by the father. I was watching my little girl, the same girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose childhood fears I had soothed, being arrested for a crime against me. The victory, the undeniable justice of the moment, was completely and totally overwhelmed by a wave of profound, soul-crushing tragedy. I saw the ghost of the 7-year-old from the photograph on my mantelpiece, and I saw the weeping, handcuffed 40-year-old criminal being led out of my study, and I could not reconcile the two. After they were gone, taken away in separate squad cars to be swallowed by the cold, impersonal machinery of the legal system, a deep humming silence descended upon the house once more. But this was not the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting is over, a silence thick with the smell of gunpowder and the weight of what had been lost. My front door was a splintered, gaping wound, a violent scar on the face of my home. The fraudulent legal papers Marcus had brought were still scattered across my desk like fallen leaves. The senior officer, a man named Sergeant Miller, stayed behind to take my full statement. I was calm, precise, and professional. I recounted the events of the past month, from Deborah's arrival to the poison soup to tonight's home invasion. I handed him the USB drive containing the footage from my new security cameras, which had captured the entire brutal affair. The forced entry, the threats, the damning evidence of their intent. I was, as Eleanor and I had so often joked, the perfect witness. You handled yourself remarkably well, Mr. Charles, the sergeant said after I had finished, a look of deep professional respect in his tired eyes. Your preparation, the panic button, you saved your own life tonight. It's what I was trained to do, Sergeant, I replied, my voice a flat, weary monotone. When he finally left, I was truly alone. I walked through the silent, violated rooms of my house. I looked at the photos on the wall, at the armchair where Eleanor used to sit, at the kitchen table where my daughter had tried to poison me, and I knew with an absolute and final certainty that I could not stay here. This house was no longer a sanctuary of happy memories. It was a crime scene, every room now tainted by the ghost of this terrible, final betrayal. It was a fortress that had been breached, and its walls would never feel safe again. My old life, the one I had shared with Eleanor, the one I had tried to cling to in my loneliness, was gone. It had been officially, brutally murdered tonight. I walked back to my study, sat down at my desk, and picked up the phone. But I did not call a friend, or my son, or a grief counselor. I called a number I had found in a local paper last week, the number for the top real estate agent in the city. The soldier in me knew that when your position has been compromised beyond repair, you do not stay and fight. You execute a strategic retreat. You find new, higher ground, and you begin to build a new life. The legal proceedings were, in the end, a swift and merciless affair. There was no lengthy, dramatic trial. There was no he said, she said. There was only the cold, hard, and undeniable truth, captured in high definition by my new security cameras. The footage was the star witness. It showed the splintering wood of my front door as it was kicked in. It recorded every word of Marcus's arrogant threats, and it captured the pale, terrified, and ultimately complicit face of my daughter as she stood by and watched. Faced with this irrefutable evidence and with her own tearful, full confession given to the police on the night of her arrest, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. I attended the sentencing hearing. I did not go for revenge or for a sense of triumph. I went for closure. I needed to see the final, definitive chapter of this story with my own eyes. I watched as they were led into the courtroom in their prison jumpsuits, two small, pathetic figures stripped of all their previous arrogance and bluster. Marcus stared at the floor, a broken, cowardly man. Deborah, however, looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a bottomless well of regret, a desperate, silent plea for a forgiveness I could not give. In that moment, I felt a final, painful pang of the fatherly love I had once had for her, a ghost limb aching for a connection that had been amputated. The judge was a no-nonsense woman who had clearly seen her share of family tragedies. She sentenced them both to significant prison terms for breaking and entering, attempted robbery, and conspiracy. The gavel fell, and it was over. While the legal system was running its course, I was executing my own strategic retreat. The real estate agent I had called was a whirlwind of efficiency. The for sale sign went up in the front yard of the house on the same day my daughter was formally indicted. The house, located in a desirable Atlanta suburb, sold in less than a month. The process of dismantling my old life was a strange and hollow experience. I walked through the rooms, tagging the furniture that would be sold, packing a few small boxes of sentimental items that were all I intended to keep. Eleanor's photograph, my Army service medals, my father's old chess set, and the green photo album, the one that showed a happy, gap-toothed little girl who no longer existed. The day I closed on the sale of the house, I did not look back. I got in my car and I drove south, towards the coast, towards the salt air and the wide open horizon, towards a future I had not planned but was now determined to embrace. I bought a small, simple condominium in a quiet coastal town in Georgia, a place known for its large community of retired veterans. The condo was everything my old house was not. It was small, bright, and easy to maintain, with a wide balcony that overlooked the marsh and the distant, shimmering line of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a home with no history, no ghosts, no rooms filled with the echoes of a life that had ended in betrayal. It was a blank slate, and for the first time in 10 years, since Eleanor's passing, the silence in my home was not the sound of loneliness, it was the sound of peace. I found my new tribe, my new family, not in the complicated, treacherous bonds of blood, but in the simple, unspoken understanding of shared experience. I joined the local Veterans Association. I started spending my mornings fishing on the community pier and my afternoons playing chess in the park with other old soldiers, men who, like me, had the ghosts of their own wars behind them. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't have to. We understood each other's silence. We spoke the same language of discipline, of honor, of a life lived in service to something larger than ourselves. They were men who understood that a man's worth was not in the size of his house or his bank account, but in the integrity of his character. My daughter tried to poison me for money, my own flesh and blood, a person I had created and loved. was willing to end my life for the sake of her own greed. But in the end, in the great strange irony of it all, she gave me the greatest gift I have ever received. She gave me my freedom. She shattered the chains of a past that had kept me a prisoner in a house of ghosts. She forced me to abandon a fortress that had become a tomb. Her betrayal was the catalyst for my liberation. I now spend my days in the warm, healing sun. I fish, I play chess, I read my history books, and I have dinner once a week with a group of men who are my brothers, my real family. We are a collection of old, scarred soldiers, finding a final, quiet peace at the edge of the world. My daughter is in a prison of her own making, but I, her intended victim, have never been more free.